The pink sweatshirt should have been forgotten by now, folded away in a memory box, perhaps, or given to charity along with other outgrown bits of childhood. But instead, it was found somewhere it should never have been, and with it came the unraveling of a quiet suburban dream. Amanda Hart was only 4 years old when she vanished without a trace from her own driveway one sunny afternoon in 2015. The only evidence she'd been there at all were the chalk drawings left behind, bright swirls of color fading slowly under the sun, like her presence slipping away unnoticed. 2 years would pass before a maintenance worker stumbled upon something unspeakable in an abandoned public restroom, a discovery that would open the door to a secret darker than anyone could have imagined. Back in May of that year, the world still felt safe, as if wrapped in a promise of gentle days and predictable rhythms. In a sleepy Portland suburb nestled among the trees, the late spring air was laced with the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming rhododendrons. It was the kind of afternoon that whispered of long summer evenings and simple pleasures. This was the life the Hart family had built, simple, sturdy, filled with love. Rodney Hart, an accountant, was the kind of man whose quiet demeanor masked an unwavering devotion to his family. His wife, Sabrina, was a freelance graphic designer who had poured her creative soul into making a magical childhood for Amanda. Every toy, every bedtime story, every birthday party had her fingerprint on it. And Amanda. Amanda was the heart of their home, a little whirlwind of curiosity and wonder, with golden pigtails that danced when she ran. To her, their backyard was a jungle, their driveway a kingdom. There was no corner of their home untouched by her imagination. On that Friday, everything felt perfect, like a story unfolding exactly as it should. Sabrina had decided to make the afternoon special. She unearthed a small kit of face paints, leftovers from a Halloween past, and sat cross-legged on the living room rug with Amanda. As she painted soft black whiskers on her daughter's cheeks and dabbed a little circle on the tip of her nose, Amanda giggled with joy, already half purring like the kitten she imagined herself to be. Sabrina reached for her phone and snapped a photo. It was slightly out of focus, the kind of moment captured not for perfection, but for love. Amanda beamed at the camera, her bright blue eyes crinkled at the corners, her favorite pink sweatshirt adding a splash of warmth against the neutral tones of the couch. It wasn't a staged memory. It was real, unguarded. And tragically, it would be the last photo ever taken of her. "Go on, sweetheart. Go draw on the driveway. Mommy's going to start dinner and then I'll come out to see your masterpiece," Sabrina said gently, ruffling Amanda's hair. Amanda darted outside, her tiny sneakers thumping against the concrete as she headed toward the box of chalk left by the porch. Sabrina turned to the kitchen, the window above the sink offering a perfect view of her daughter scribbling hearts and stars on the pavement. She started washing vegetables, her eyes flicking up now and then to check on Amanda. Then her phone rang, a client calling about brochure proofs. The timing was inconvenient, but not unusual. She wiped her hands, stepped into the office nook a few feet away, and opened her laptop. Sabrina later described that phone call with a voice hollowed by guilt. Not just any guilt. This was the soul-crushing kind that gnawed away at every moment of silence for years to come. It was just a few minutes, a quick discussion about fonts and layout. But in that time, Amanda slipped quietly out of view. By the time the call ended, Sabrina returned to the kitchen, assuming Amanda was still outside. She stirred a pot on the stove, lost in thoughts about dinner the weekend ahead, blissfully unaware that something unimaginable had already occurred just outside her window. Then, 20 minutes later, the sound of Rodney's Subaru turning into the driveway marked the end of another ordinary work week. He stepped out, expecting the same welcome he always received, Amanda running into his arms, squealing with delight. Instead, all he found were chalk drawings, unicorns, flowers, a sun with rays reaching in every direction. But no Amanda. He squinted, confused. Maybe she'd gone inside. "Honey, I'm home," he called as he stepped through the front door. Sabrina emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "Where's Manda?" Rodney asked casually. Sabrina's smile faltered. "She's in the driveway," she replied automatically. "I just saw her a few minutes ago." And then, silence. A silence thick with dawning dread. They stared at each other, the air between them suddenly heavy. Without a word, they bolted toward the door. The screen door slammed behind them, echoing like a warning shot through the still afternoon. Amanda was gone. Sabrina's voice sliced through the afternoon calm, her tone sharp and urgent, like the crack of glass under pressure. "Amanda!" she called out, her voice trembling. Rodney's deeper baritone followed instantly, echoing through the quiet cul-de-sac with rising intensity. They searched first in the places that made the most sense. Their own backyard, a sanctuary Amanda had turned into her kingdom, but the swing set hung still, untouched. The sandbox remained sealed, its bright plastic cover unmoved. They circled the house, hearts pounding, glancing behind the thick alia bushes where Amanda often hid during games of pretend. Nothing. A strange, cold pressure gripped their chests. The kind of fear that starts as a whisper but quickly becomes a scream inside your mind. They bolted next door, pounding on their neighbors' doors. Mr. Henderson, still tending to his petunias, looked up in confusion before his face creased into concern. Across the street, the muffled sound of a sitcom laugh track filtered through an open window. Life going on, unaware that a world had just shifted off its axis, and still, no one had seen her. Just minutes ago, this neighborhood had felt like a cradle, familiar, safe, warm. Now it was a labyrinth, each familiar tree and trimmed hedge transformed into something sinister. The chalk drawings on the driveway mocked them now, static remnants of a joyful moment that had ended far too abruptly. It had only been 10 minutes, but for Rodney and Sabrina, it might as well have been an eternity. The sun was beginning to slip behind the rooftops, casting an orange and violet sheen across the sky, bathing their street in a light far too beautiful for the dread curling in their stomachs. Every place had been checked, every corner called into. Their voices had grown hoarse, but the silence that responded was absolute. Then Sabrina stopped, her eyes wide and filled with tears, locked onto Rodney's. Her voice broke into a whisper. "We have to call." Rodney nodded, too choked to speak. Sabrina's hands shook so badly she fumbled with the phone, struggling to unlock the screen. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. When she finally managed to dial, her words stumbled out in a sob. "My daughter. She's gone. She was just here. She was right here." Within minutes, the whine of sirens pierced the quiet, and the first police cruiser pulled into their driveway, its lights flashing in cruel contrast to the fading daylight. The young officer who stepped out wore a mask of calm professionalism, but his presence did little to still the chaos erupting inside the Hart household. He asked the usual questions. Amanda's age, her clothes, the last time she was seen. But to Sabrina and Rodney, these words felt like background noise, barely registering above the sound of their racing thoughts and pounding hearts. Soon, more officers arrived, the once peaceful cul-de-sac becoming a maze of flashing lights and whispered radios. Neighbors stepped onto porches, drawn by curiosity, their expressions morphing into worry as the situation became clear. The search for Amanda Hart had officially begun. But for her parents, their world had already collapsed. It had ended in the stillness of an empty driveway, surrounded by the soft remains of chalk dreams. What began as a simple missing child call quickly escalated. The Portland Police Bureau recognized the harrowing signs of a possible abduction. Standard protocol was tossed aside in favor of urgency. Within the hour, a mobile command center arrived, a white RV bristling with antennas, its generator humming a low, ominous drone. Detective Miles Corbin arrived soon after, a seasoned veteran, his face worn by years of bearing witness to other families' worst days. His voice was calm but edged with gravity as he interviewed Rodney and Sabrina. Each question was a thread, helping him stitch together a fragile timeline, minute by minute, decision by decision. Then, confirmation of the nightmare. A state trooper arrived with Rocco, a bloodhound trained for scent detection. The handler offered the dog a sock pulled from Amanda's bedroom hamper. Rocco took a long, deep inhale. Then, without hesitation, he began his work. The dog circled the chalk drawings, nose to the pavement, ignoring the chaos around him. Then he followed a clear path down the driveway, toward the street. At the edge of the curb, he stopped. He circled the area, whining softly. Then he looked back at his handler. There was no more scent to follow. As stated in the official report, Rocco's behavior was consistent with a vehicle pickup. Amanda hadn't wandered off. She had been taken. The relief that maybe, just maybe, she'd walked too far dissolved instantly, replaced with a new horror. Somewhere, someone had Amanda, and they were already gone. Detective Corbin's team intensified their search. Every house was canvassed again, every car scrutinized. They weren't looking for Amanda anymore. They were looking for someone who didn't belong. The first possible clue came from Mr. Henderson. His memory was hazy, but he recalled a van, an older white model. No logos, no plates that he could remember. What stood out was its slow movement, unusual for their street, especially at that hour. To him, it had seemed harmless at the time, but now, in the aftermath, it felt like a shadow hiding in plain sight. It was vague, maddeningly so, but it was all they had. A BOLO alert went out statewide for an older white van, unmarked, possibly linked to a contractor or service worker. The warning was a necessary step, but it triggered chaos. Every white van in Oregon suddenly became a suspect. Within hours, tips flooded dispatch. A white van near a park in Beaverton. Another one spotted idling behind a gas station in Salem. Each report brought hope. Each one carried the cruel potential of being nothing at all. And beneath it all, Rodney and Sabrina waited, trapped in the cruelest limbo a parent could endure. Reports of white vans began pouring in from all directions. One spotted driving erratically along the I-5 corridor, another lingering near a rest area outside Salem. Police stopped dozens of them. Drivers were questioned. Cargo spaces were opened and searched under floodlights. But every stop ended the same way. A cleared driver and an ever-growing sense of helplessness. The white van had become a ghost, everywhere and nowhere, slipping like smoke through the fingers of those desperate to catch it. While the search intensified outside, the interior of the Hart household had become something else entirely. Once a sanctuary, it now felt foreign, invaded, cold. The hum of law enforcement didn't stop at the front door. It permeated the walls, the carpet, even the silence. As is grimly routine in child disappearances, suspicion first circles closest to home. Rodney and Sabrina were separated and questioned for hours in rooms filled with the scent of their own despair. The same home they'd once filled with laughter now echoed with accusations, however veiled. Every inch of their timeline was picked apart. Sabrina, her voice raw and her eyes vacant, repeated the same truth over and over. I was gone 20 minutes. Only 20. Her words fell like stones into a bottomless well, each one swallowed by protocol. Their home became a crime scene. A forensic team moved through the rooms in clinical silence, photographing Amanda's toys, collecting their devices, dusting for prints on surfaces still warm from use. It was necessary, but it felt brutal. A second trauma layered on top of the first. Though Detective Corbin privately cleared them of any involvement within 24 hours, public perception was less forgiving. News cycles turned Amanda's disappearance into a spectacle. Headlines asked leading questions, talk show hosts theorized. And though no one pointed directly at Sabrina or Rodney, The insinuations were poison. How does a child vanish in broad daylight? The 20-minute window became a weapon, wielded subtly but powerfully against them. Sabrina's phone call, once just a moment of distraction, was now dissected by strangers, analyzed on message boards and late-night news. But amidst the suspicion, Amanda's face became a symbol, her blue eyes crinkling with joy, her cheeks painted with whiskers and a small black cat nose. The photo Sabrina had snapped just hours before it all collapsed now blanketed the city. It was everywhere, taped to lampposts, blinking on highway billboards, printed on gas station screens. People responded. Portland came alive with empathy. Print shops donated flyers. Strangers volunteered to search. Parents held their own children closer that week. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through Forest Park and combed abandoned lots along the Columbia River. They called Amanda's name into the wind, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that a chorus of voices might carry across some unseen boundary and bring her home. Then came a spark. 1 week after Amanda vanished, a call hit the tip line like a thunderbolt. A long-haul trucker, refueling at a rest stop 200 miles south, claimed he saw her, blonde hair, pink shirt, sitting beside a scruffy man who looked out of place. The girl looked sad. The man looked nervous. It fit. The timing, the direction, everything. Rodney and Sabrina were taken into protective custody by the FBI, told only that there had been a credible sighting. For the first time in days, they felt something almost forgotten. Hope. They spent 24 hours in suspended belief, imagining Amanda frightened but alive, eating French fries, maybe trying to stay brave. They clung to the thought like lifelines. And then it broke. The footage arrived. The girl was real, but she wasn't Amanda. She was another child, part of another family just passing through. The hope they'd held so tightly shattered in their hands, leaving behind only numbness and an even deeper silence. 3 weeks in, the unthinkable happened. The active search was suspended. Official resources had dried up. The command post packed up. The news vans rolled away. Volunteers went back to their own lives, many of them crying quietly as they removed flyers from store windows. The silence that fell over Sycamore Lane was deafening. For Rodney and Sabrina, the world simply stopped. Amanda's case was now cold. Time did what it always does. It moved forward, regardless of grief. Weeks became months. Seasons blurred into each other. And for the Harts, those days passed like a fog, heavy, endless, directionless. The yellow ribbons tied around trees faded and frayed. Amanda's smiling face, once everywhere, was slowly replaced by festival posters and missing pet signs. Her image remained only in hearts and on refrigerator doors. In the Portland Police Bureau, a thick manila folder sat quietly on Detective Corbin's desk. Amanda Hart's case was no longer urgent, but to Corbin, it was never just a file. It was a scar. He'd seen too many like it, and still, no leads, no evidence, no suspect. Just a trail that had vanished like smoke the moment it began. Back at the house on Sycamore Lane, time had stopped. Amanda's room remained untouched. It was a frozen shrine to a little girl who still loved pink tutus and stuffed giraffes. A hand-drawn rainbow, never finished, was still taped to her wall. Her favorite giraffe lay on the pillow, its button eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Sometimes, Sabrina would stand at the doorway, unable to walk in. The room felt sacred and unbearable. Rodney had taken to sleeping on the couch. The bed felt too big, too empty, too haunted by absence. Their shared grief became a silent wall between them, not made of anger or blame, but of exhaustion. There were no words left, just the quiet presence of a sorrow too vast to name. They had lost their daughter, and then, slowly, quietly, the world had moved on. The laughter that once bubbled through the Hart home like music had long since faded. What remained was silence, dense, heavy, and haunted by memories too painful to say aloud. Rodney and Sabrina moved around each other like two shadows in a house that no longer felt like home. They were bound together by their enduring love for Amanda, yet simultaneously isolated by the quiet, corrosive nature of individual grief. They hurt differently and therefore alone. Their marriage was fragile, brittle at the edges, but it hadn't broken. What held it together wasn't romantic love anymore, but a shared mission. Amanda. Keeping her memory alive was not just a cause, it was their only remaining connection to the daughter they'd lost and to each other. They became unwilling curators of their own tragedy. Rodney, the quiet and methodical accountant, poured his energy into building a website, findamandahart.org. Sabrina, a former graphic designer, ran the corresponding Facebook page. Every morning she posted, pleas for leads, memories, questions. Sometimes it was a faded photo. Amanda laughing at the beach, swinging with her hair caught in the wind, or eating a popsicle in the backyard on a summer day. On Amanda's 5th birthday, then her 6th. Sabrina reposted the same photo each year, Amanda with painted cat whiskers and bright eyes, frozen in time just hours before everything unraveled. Her caption never changed. 2 years without your smile. We will never stop looking. We love you, Amanda. The page grew to thousands of followers, strangers who became a digital family, holding vigil with comments and shares. Their words, their clicks, became tiny lights in the unrelenting dark. But in the wild undercurrent of the internet, Amanda's story took on a new, often unnerving life. Online, cold cases never die. They morph. They are dissected on forums, discussed in threads, obsessed over by anonymous minds with time and curiosity. Amanda's disappearance became a case study on sites like Unresolved Mysteries and the Cold Case Collective. Users constructed timelines, analyzed maps, and debated theories from behind screen names. One theory dominated, eerily mirroring Detective Corbin's private thoughts. This had been a crime of opportunity, an unplanned snatch, a predator acting on impulse. The abrupt end to the scent trail, the lack of surveillance footage, the absence of a ransom, all pointed to someone disorganized, scared, likely local. It was a chilling idea, not because it was cinematic, but because it wasn't. It suggested the kidnapper wasn't a monster in the shadows, but someone ordinary. A neighbor, a mail carrier, a man who shopped at the same grocery store. Other theories were darker, conspiratorial. Some believed Amanda had been targeted, that her family was watched, that someone had known Sabrina's habits, her schedule, the timing of her call. This line of thought infected the Harts like a virus. They began questioning everything, revisiting every casual hello, every unfamiliar glance. Sabrina scoured old emails. Rodney rewatched neighborhood security footage. They barely slept. Every face became suspect, every memory contaminated. What was a game to online sleuths became psychological torment for Amanda's parents. They monitored the forums compulsively, hoping a stranger might notice something the professionals missed, fearing that Amanda's life was being reduced to bullet points and baseless speculation. Then, almost exactly 2 years after Amanda vanished, a crack of possibility reappeared. It came from an unexpected place, an Idaho prison. Detective Corbin received a call from the warden. An inmate, Marcus Thorne, a career criminal serving time for armed robbery, claimed to have knowledge about Amanda's case. He said his former cellmate had confessed to the abduction and had told him where Amanda's body was, buried. In exchange, he wanted a reduced sentence. It was a long shot. Prison confessions are often false currency traded for leniency, but protocol demanded every claim be investigated. Corbin approached Rodney and Sabrina with great caution. He didn't promise answers, only that something new had emerged. After 2 years of deafening silence, even a sliver of news lit a dangerous hope. 2 detectives flew to Idaho to meet Thorne. He was charismatic. He seemed credible, at first. He spoke of a shallow grave in the woods outside Portland, of guilt confessed in whispers during shared sleepless nights. But slowly, inconsistencies surfaced. His timeline didn't align. Details, though seemingly precise, matched only public reports. The narrative began to unravel. Pressed harder, Thorne stalled. A polygraph test was inconclusive. Then finally, the lie broke. He confessed he had seen Amanda's case in a true crime documentary and fabricated the story in hopes of shortening his sentence. The heartbreak of it wasn't loud. It didn't come with screams. It arrived in stillness. In Sabrina's quiet, devastated nod when the detectives returned with the news. In Rodney's jaw clenching to suppress a howl of fury and helplessness. This wasn't just a hoax. It was a betrayal. A cruel exploitation of their pain. The hope that had bloomed, however fragile, was gone. And in its absence, a darker emptiness took root. One that suggested they were not only alone, but disposable. Their daughter's life, currency to a man with nothing left to lose. Then, something changed, and it didn't come from a press conference or a detective's breakthrough. It came from the woods. In April of 2017, a man named Dave McCann was deep in the Mount Hood National Forest. Dave wasn't a cop. He wasn't part of the search effort. He was a 58-year-old seasonal maintenance worker with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, a man who made a living in silence, driving forgotten gravel roads and tending to crumbling trail signs and abandoned rest stops. Dave had the kind of solitude-worn face that belonged to men who'd traded cities for trees. His hands were cracked. His words were few. And on a Tuesday morning, under a sky faded to denim blue, he rolled his green Parks truck down a service road most people didn't even know existed. He stopped at an old concrete blockhouse, an obsolete public restroom half consumed by brush and moss. It was tucked so deep in the forest, it might as well have been part of the land itself. The air was damp, and the place stank of mildew and old decay. Inside, he found what he expected: neglect. But this time, something was off. The toilet was clogged, overflowing, not with trash or mud. The water was dark, thick, and unnatural. Dave sighed. Just another mess. He pulled on his gloves and grabbed his tools, a heavy-duty plumber's snake and a long hooked rod. He knelt on the wet floor, feeding the snake into the drain. But instead of hitting the usual soft blockage, paper, leaves, debris, he met resistance. Dense, fibrous. Something was stuck. He switched tools. With the hooked rod, he reached into the dark opening and twisted until the hook caught on something solid. He pulled. It didn't give. He leaned back, grunting with effort, until finally, it broke free. A soggy, heavy bundle emerged with a thick, sloshing sound. It hit the tile with a thud. At first, it was just mass, wet fabric, tangled and grim. But as Dave prodded at it with the hook, colors emerged, a pale pink, a faint, faded blue. Then he saw it, clothing, children's clothing, and everything in him stilled. What Dave had pulled from that forgotten forest toilet was no longer just a bundle of trash. It was a revelation. A small, long-sleeved sweatshirt, pink, waterlogged, its fabric stained and bleached by time. Beneath it, a pair of tiny blue shorts, and inside the folds, disturbingly packed with what seemed like deliberate intent, a small pair of girls' underwear. That detail was what chilled Dave the most. The careful, almost methodical way the clothing had been bundled together, as if someone had taken their time to ensure it would sink, to bury it not in soil but in waste and silence. It wasn't an accident. It was concealment. A dark, panicked act meant to erase evidence from the world. He backed away from the pile, his breath shallow. Dave wasn't a man given to panic, but in that moment, he felt something primal stirring inside him. Even he, quiet, solitary, far removed from the daily churn of news, remembered. A child, a pink shirt, A disappearance that once gripped the entire state. The image hovered at the edges of memory, half-formed and ghost-like, until he looked again at the shirt, and everything snapped into place. He didn't hesitate. He returned to his truck, his boots squelching against the damp forest floor, and picked up the radio. A short call, clear, measured, but behind the voice, his hands trembled. Deputy Peterson, young but seasoned enough to know when something didn't feel right, responded quickly. As his patrol car wound down the gravel road, kicking up dust clouds in the late afternoon light, he expected a case of vandalism, maybe an illegal dump site. What he found, instead, was something else, entirely. Dave stood by the restroom, his arms crossed tightly, face pale. Inside, Peterson saw it all. The bundle, the clothes, the placement. He didn't need training to feel the wrongness of the scene. He took photos, collected the evidence with sterile gloves, bagged the clothing. And as he drove back toward civilization, the small bundle sat beside him in silence. A quiet, terrible weight. Something about it felt like a scream, barely contained. At the sheriff's office, the evidence sat momentarily unnoticed until it caught the eye of one man, Detective Miles Corbin. He had left Portland for quieter work in Clackamas County, but his soul had never left Amanda, Hart's case. He saw the evidence bag, the pink shirt visible through the plastic, a familiar color, a familiar size. His heart clenched. He didn't need to check the file. He remembered every detail of that photo, Amanda's last known image, but he checked anyway. He pulled up the digital cold case. Amanda's face smiled back at him, those cat whiskers drawn onto her rosy cheeks, that pink sweatshirt worn proudly. He zoomed in. A small white thread visible at the left cuff. A repair. Then he turned to the deputy's crime scene photo. Zoomed. There it was. The same thread, the same small tear mended by a mother's hand. Confirmation. A breathless surge of adrenaline. A moment of absolute clarity after 2 years of fog. The case had broken wide open. That same evening, as twilight brushed the neighborhood in gold, the Hart family received a knock on their door. Rodney opened it. His heart already knew. Corbin stood there, his expression heavy. A woman stood beside him, an FBI victim advocate, hands folded, her face unreadable. Inside the home, Sabrina clutched a coffee mug she hadn't drunk from. They listened as Corbin laid out the photos on the coffee table. The sweatshirt, the shorts, the underwear, placed gently on a sterile lab cloth, now etched forever in forensic clarity. Sabrina gasped, the air catching in her throat as though her lungs forgot how to function. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the photo. "That's hers," she whispered. "I remember that cuff. It tore, and I stitched it with white thread." Corbin nodded. He tapped the photo. "We found the thread." The room tilted. The ground shifted. For 2 years, Amanda had existed only in memory and photographs. Now she existed again, but through artifacts dredged from darkness. The grief Rodney and Sabrina had worked so hard to contain now erupted. Not with answers, but with new questions. Terrifying, unrelenting ones. Where was Amanda now? The evidence was real, tangible. It was proof she had been somewhere, that someone had kept her or harmed her, and that someone had returned, a year or more after the crime, to rid themselves of the evidence. The case was no longer cold. It roared back to life with a new pulse. The Oregon State Crime Lab moved quickly. DNA was degraded beyond recovery, but the wear on the fabric told a different story. Investigators determined the clothes had not been there for 2 years, likely 1, maybe less. That detail changed everything. It meant whoever had taken Amanda had held on to her belongings. For a year, maybe more. That kind of behavior didn't align with a master predator. A professional would have incinerated the evidence, buried it deep, left nothing. But this? Stuffing it into a public forest toilet. It was amateur, clumsy, panic-driven. The incompetent abductor theory once debated in whispers across online forums, was now a central tenet of the investigation. But this time, investigators had more than just speculation. They had geography, the Mount Hood National Forest. A real location, a radius, a new beginning. Corbin and his team went back to the 2015 files. Every name, every tip, every registered offender within 100 miles. They re-examined connections, mapped every potential link to the forest. Campgrounds, relatives, job sites, cell phone pings. It was tedious work, meticulous. The adrenaline rush faded. Days turned into weeks. Then it came, a hit, not from a new tip, but from a name buried deep in the original case notes, Frank Miller. In 2015, Miller had lived just 3 blocks from the Harts. He had been interviewed early, an awkward man in his late 30s, working odd handyman jobs with a few minor infractions from his youth. Nothing violent. Back then, he was one of dozens of neighbors with shaky stories and no alibi. Nervous, evasive, but ultimately dismissed. Now he was back in the frame, because in 2017 he'd moved to a remote cabin less than 10 miles from the restroom where Amanda's clothing had been found. The thread was finally tightening. Frank Miller's name had once been just a footnote in a long list of potential witnesses, an unremarkable man with a forgettable presence. But buried in property records was a detail that would change everything. His grandparents, long deceased, had owned a small, decaying cabin on a private plot of land deep inside Mount Hood National Forest. The address, isolated and surrounded by old growth, was less than 5 miles down a series of logging roads from where Amanda's clothes had been found. A coincidence too cruel and precise to ignore. Then came the next revelation. A move. 6 months after Amanda vanished, Miller had abruptly left Portland without fanfare, resurfacing in a dying town in eastern Oregon. No forwarding address, no job record until a year later. It was the kind of absence that screamed to seasoned detectives, flight. Now the pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. A quiet loner who lived mere blocks from Amanda. A history of trespassing. A forgotten cabin hidden in the wilderness. A sudden, unexplained relocation. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to shift the full weight of the investigation onto his name. Corbin's team deployed a unit of plainclothes officers to the town where Miller now lived, a faded dot on the map clinging to survival. He was working as a handyman at a rundown motel, living in a dilapidated rental house. He kept to himself, spoke to no one unless spoken to, and walked through life like a ghost waiting to be forgotten. While he was being watched, a warrant was secured for the cabin. The search team wound their way along the same remote trails Dave McCann had traveled. The cabin was there, tilted, decaying, all but consumed by the forest. Inside, time had done its work. Moldavian dust. Silence. Hours passed. Nothing. Until one rookie detective, thinking like a handyman, pried up a warped floorboard in the back bedroom closet. He shone his flashlight into the dark, shallow crawl space. There, buried in the dirt beside a stack of moldering newspapers, was something small, bright, innocent. A child's plastic hair clip, shaped like a cartoon cat. The kind of trinket a little girl would pick from a bin at a dollar store and cherish like treasure. That night, Corbin returned to the Hart home. His face was drawn. In his hands, a photo of the clip. Sabrina stared at it, then placed her fingertips against the screen. "She had one just like that," she whispered. "She was wearing it that day. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to." The next morning, Frank Miller was arrested without incident. His hands trembled, his face went pale. He didn't ask why. He already knew. In the sterile gray of the interrogation room, it didn't take long. He unraveled almost instantly. The confession came in fits and sobs, a tragic, gut-wrenching portrait of cowardice and cruelty. He said it hadn't been planned, that he'd seen Amanda alone, her back turned, a child vulnerable, and something inside him cracked. He snatched her before she could cry out, drove straight to the family cabin. What followed were 2 days of horror. 2 days that would haunt the Hart family for the rest of their lives. He admitted to keeping Amanda locked inside, confused and afraid, while he spiraled between panic and denial. He saw her face on the news and realized what he'd done. On the second day, she tried to run. She made it outside the door, screaming. He tackled her, covered her mouth, and he didn't let go. He claimed it was an accident, that he only meant to quiet her, that he hadn't meant to take her life. But he did. He buried her deep in the forest, beneath a moss-covered log he remembered from childhood. He kept her clothes, hiding them in the cabin like a twisted trophy. A year later, overcome with paranoia, he returned, not to grieve, but to erase. He retrieved the clothes and, unable to revisit her grave, stuffed them down a toilet in a remote restroom, thinking no one would ever find them. But someone did. And that mistake, his belief that he could flush away a child's life, was his undoing. Frank Miller led the team into the forest. Shackled, head low, he stopped at the place he remembered, a fallen tree blanketed in moss. He pointed. They began to dig. Within hours, they found Amanda. Her small body was still intact, protected by the cold soil and quiet. The final confirmation came in silence. Rodney and Sabrina were notified with care, but there was no way to soften the blow. Their daughter had been found, but she would never come home. The trial was swift and excruciating. The courtroom was filled each day with volunteers, neighbors, reporters, people who had prayed for a miracle. In the front row sat Rodney and Sabrina, statues carved from grief. Miller looked nothing like the monster they had imagined. Just a man, small, weak, hollow. His defense claimed diminished capacity, panic, social dysfunction, a low IQ, that it wasn't murder, just a terrible mistake made by a broken man. But the prosecution was unrelenting. They painted the full picture, a man who saw an opportunity, seized it, and then tried desperately to erase it. They played his own confession in court. They showed the hair clip, the sweatshirt, the toilet, every detail. The most devastating blow came in the closing argument. "This man tried to flush away a child's life," said prosecutor Eleanor Vance. But the truth doesn't stay buried. Her final cry for justice wasn't loud, it was quiet. It came from a forgotten restroom in the woods, but it was heard. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts, Frank Miller was sentenced to life without parole. He looked once toward Rodney and Sabrina as he was led away, but there was no apology in his eyes, only emptiness. The case was over. The monster caged. But the pain was permanent. Rodney and Sabrina sold the house on Sycamore Lane. They couldn't bear the echo of Amanda's laughter in the rooms. They moved to a coastal town, to a small house with windows that faced the sea. There they found a semblance of peace, not in forgetting, but in remembering differently. In a park near the beach, they placed a bench. Simple, sturdy. A brass plaque read, "In loving memory of Amanda Hart. May her light remind us to cherish every moment." Sometimes they sit there in the afternoons, watching children play, hearing the laughter of lives still whole. It doesn't heal them, but it reminds them that innocence endures, that somewhere joy still rises. The case of Amanda Hart was closed, but the silence she left behind would echo forever, a small, sacred space in their hearts, where a little girl's laughter once lived.